Well, first I want to welcome the guests and to thank you for your submissions, which we have read and considered. And I suppose I want to go to Professor O'Cada first, because you mentioned some time ago, you were at a conference in May and you talked about affirming the right to housing as a fundamental entitlement, and I would fully agree with that, and I actually believe we should have a constitutional provision for that right. But it raises the issue then about when you have a right, you have the issue of how do I vindicate that right? And so I think that's empowering in itself, and I think that's what it's all about. That is the kernel of this, that sense of empowerment. How can I vindicate my rights? And it's empowering to the citizen, it's empowering to the people. And we in Ireland are very proud of our constitution, all of us. So it's something that's constantly cited as in the constitution, the Bible, the constitution for us. So therefore I think it's a good one. Just to Professor O'Cada, you mentioned that there are, you say, and I quote here, there are some reasons to be sceptical about the constitutionalising social rights, such as the right to housing. Rights rhetoric often does not translate into effective action. There are arguments for and against such a plan. Tell me the against, the disadvantages. Could you just list out 3 disadvantages in relation to the constitutional provision for housing, in your view?
Okay, three disadvantages. I'm going to act as devil's advocate. First of all, generates expectations that can't be fulfilled. People ask, we have a right to housing. We expect this to be vindicated. And the government goes, we're running really low on money. There's crisis in Ukraine. We're dealing with massive inflation. We have a problem. And that gap between the reality and practice, that can be a real problem. It can cause discontent, it can cause disillusionment, it can cause anger. First problem. Second problem, the risk of unintended legal consequences. Now, you can always get unintended legal consequences. My own view is that these can be overstated, in particular in a jurisdiction like Ireland, where actually the courts are very, very consistent in how they interpret and apply legislation and constitutional provisions. But you can have unanticipated legal consequences. You can have litigants, middle-class litigants, for example, quite privileged litigants, being able to afford very expensive senior counsel to challenge a particular provision using relation to right to housing, which could have unanticipated consequences. That's a potential risk, though I think it can be overstated. The third risk is the third potential problem is that you create uncertainty. That you've got this abstract constitutional provision and no one's quite sure how it affects landlord and tenant law, how it affects property law, how it affects existing administrative policy and housing allocation, all of these issues. So there's the third concern is one of uncertainty, that it creates it puts things up in the air, and that can be very, very nice. Okay. So there are 3 negative arguments.
Okay, so could I come back to the Professor for a second and say, so just say we move on and we have this constitutional provision for the right to housing. How does a citizen then vindicate that right? I mean, we know through the court you're going to tell me, but I'm saying, there's where the difficulty may be, very well be. So we now have this right, but vindicate. Now take us down the road of vindicating our constitutional right to housing.
These are all the excellent questions, I have to say. But vindication can come in different forms. It can come political and legal. There's often a tendency to think it's the Constitution, it must be legal. The Constitution was never designed to be just legal, but I'll come to the political side in a moment. There are legal avenues potentially opened up if you're very visibly getting stuck in a condition of totally inadequate housing supply. Your housing accommodation, for example, for a disabled member of your family is utterly inadequate. The state is manifestly screwing up, failing to act. Then there is some room potentially opened up there for legal action. And then you can talk to FLAC, you can talk to an advice agency and a civil society group organisation, someone to try and help you in that respect. But there's also, I think, the often neglected aspect of this, which is the political aspect of this. You have there is something concrete there to go to your TD, to go to your senator, to go to even the ombudsman, even as well, and other similar complaint structures to say what's happening here. And the right to housing doesn't create whole new legal structures. It doesn't give you a magic bullet, as the Senator rightly said, but it does, if you want, spotlight the fact that there are these different vindication avenues, and it makes everyone in the system aware of the fact that this right is sitting there and must be responded to.
Okay, well, Professor, just to wind up, and I'm sorry I'm only concentrating on you, but it's because they were issues that you raised in your submission, particularly that sort of raised an interest with me. The other thing then is there's that thing of legitimate expectations. So we have a constitution, like this is a very strong document. We believe in it. We believe it's going to vindicate our rights. So we've this legitimate expectation that the state will uphold those constitutional rights. So would I be correct in saying once you put this referendum in wording into the constitution, and I have to say I support that, how do we then, there's an added responsibility of the state. There's already responsibility, but so look, this is a committee dealing with housing. You know, it doesn't necessarily get results, but we're focusing on it. We're across the houses of the Oireachtas. But in terms of that legitimate, I would have thought that the citizens, if they come out in large numbers to vote for this referendum to include this provision in the constitution, they will be doing so on the basis that they're going to have some sort of leverage or legitimate expectation on behalf of the state to be able to crank the state into position. You cited a disabled person that may need housing and is in dire need of housing. Surely they're going to have enormous rights. This should enhance a rights base for the citizen in terms of housing. Would I be correct in saying that?
That's the hope and the expectation. We'll have to see what happens.
Do you believe that's possible?
Do you believe, amplify what's available.
Do you believe that has the potential to do that?
Yes, I actually think you've put your finger on the point. I actually think that there will be an expectation of change, and I think that expectation of change is actually going to be the driver. That's maybe the most important thing of this entire process. So
can I just wrap up by saying that, without putting words in your mouth, so this is a strong, you'd endorse this proposal for a referendum on housing, the right to housing in the Irish Constitution. Would you be in the position to say that?
Yes.
Thanks.